Hello, this is a Bluthner style 7 grand piano made in 1893, and just looking at the piano with regard to restoring it completely. So this side here is exposed to the light, so it's got lighter, and the other side's obviously not been exposed, so it's a darker colour. So the finish on this piano is done in the time, it's about 1950s, Harrods sold this. Whether they did it or someone else did it, but it's quite common, and as I mentioned before, how the grain is covered up. So it's like brush stroked over here, hiding all the original grain. And if you've seen videos of Bluthner grands when they're fully repolished, there's a spectacular grain on Bluthners. Not quite sure why they did that. Probably because there weren't any around like that, people who wanted a plain looking one. It's the only thoughts I could have. And also the legs are replaced. They would be turned legs originally. And you might notice here that it's got shepherd casters on, which is, again, a bit unusual. I think there's a fashion at that time to put shepherd casters on. They are quite effective, but they don't look at all right for the piano, and they tend to break with the weight of the piano sometimes anyway. The pedals are quite low, they're 6 centimetres, the leg room's about 60 and a bit, so there is scope to put some caster cups under if you want to raise up a bit. You could, if you want to get any more height for leg room, then you'd have to lower this, and that's quite difficult, to amend, because it means amending the whole of the pedal box. And again, that should be turned originally. So it's not badly done. It's quite commonly done in that period of time, that they would change the legs. Again, probably because there weren't enough squared legs pianos for the demand. So they would change the turned legs for squared legs. And the desk has been changed too. If we look at the desk here, that's a very plain desk indeed. It's like a modern desk, really. Now that would have been very fancy indeed. If you've seen the old Bluthners of that time, it was very ornate. So that can all be done when it's repolished. This looks spectacular, and that's a sign of what we're going to get if we repolish the whole piano. We're going to get that kind of beautiful. I don't know why they didn't brush over that, but fortunately you can see there what the whole piano could turn out like. And this slides forward. I wanted to mention that because it was disabled, because as you see, the part underneath is missing, so that's been disabled, and this side doesn't slide. I had to turn a catch round on the bottom of the piano, underside of it, to get that to work. You can see the grain here, but it's too shiny and it's too dark, really. We would redo that. And these little crests here, coat of arms or crests, aren't normally on the Bluthners, younger Bluthners. I think of this age I've seen them before. In fact, I'm sure I have. I'm not quite sure what age they are. If you're in the trade and would like to comment on which age of Bluthner had these, it'd be really useful to learn. And this has faded quite a lot too here. So there's going to be a very beautiful grain, even more spectacular than that, I think, when it's stripped down and repolished. Now, key tops are perfect ivory, just slightly yellowed, but very beautiful. And recently we've had to mention that ivory needs certificates if you sell it. If you export, it has to have a CITES, which is expensive, and it's time consuming to get. So very often, if the piano is sent abroad to be restored, we'd have to sometimes we just do the action and keys ourselves, if we are going to send it abroad. So, and if the piano is exported to the USA, for instance, you have to change the ivories anyway. That's a nuisance, really. It's a shame, but obviously we understand why. And it's 88 keys, as Bluthners are of this age. And there's the Harrods logo there, showing that it was sold by Harrods. When the piano is restored, it can also we can have a stool to match the piano, which might be a good idea, really. So turned legs and turned lyre is a possibility if it's being fully redone. Just want to have a look at the insides now, the mechanics, and the tuning pins aren't just slightly bigger. I'm not sure if they're original or not. The strings may have been replaced, and certainly the bottom bass has been placed here. I think these are original Bluthner strings, looking at the way it's finished off. So they've replaced the bottom bass here, and there's lots of loose tuning pins. You can hear they're flat. That one's all right. So quite a few of them are loose, and you can see here, if you look, that they have been actually set further in, quite a few of them, than they would have been originally. So there's obviously a problem with tuning, and at the top end there's one, and I checked the pin there, and that was a bit loose. So it's a good candidate really for full restoration, changing the rest blank here. You can tell that an original Bluthner rest blank that it's blacked here. When they replace the person who's redone it, rarely blacks this. You can see some multi-layered rest blank. Delignate rest blank is the normal one that's put on, or rock maple. So that's the original one, and because the tuning pins are loose, it would be a good idea to change that. Really, it's easier to change the Bluthner than many makes because it comes out very easily. So that's the job we so frequently do. The strings, so the replaced strings are sounding quite reasonable, really. In fact, they are very good tone. So it'll be similar once it's redone, just a bit more lively in the treble when the strings are replaced. Well, the underlying tone of Bluthner's is so gorgeous, and it's retained. I rarely find that Bluthner's soundboards are bad. Find that they're nearly always 100%. It's very rare we'll find one that has a problem, and I don't think we need to recap the bridge even. The down bearing's perfect. That's testimony to the wonderful manufacturing standard of Bluthner grand pianos. It's such a beautiful bell-like sound. This is the original decal for 1893, and there's a serial number underneath. This serial number's not on your piano, by the way, on your Bluthner. It's always behind the action. It is just conceivable to keep this if the soundboard's just cleaned instead of completely refinished, and if there's no shims put in it. And in fact, I can't see any cracks in this one, but when the whole piano is taken apart, you might find that there are some slight cracks that will need shimming. So that's a possibility. Pre-finishing the frame obviously is something we'll do at the same time, and all the felts here get replaced. They're correct Bluthner blue felts, so we would obviously redo it in the same way. And the dampers, these are all decisions to make. The dampers are good and damping well, but with the new strings, the restorers generally want to put new dampers on as well. I've checked for moth under here. It's very common for pianos to get moth in them, so if you can see little round green things here, green bits here, it's moth larva droppings, and it's very, very common. But I think these are in perfect condition. Now, looking at the action, I think these little lines here suggest that that's something you dug in there to try and tighten up the key a little bit, because I don't think those have been replaced. That's something we look into on the restoration process. They're very long wearing anyway on Bluthner grands, so that might be why. These springs are always pretty extremely reliable and are working well. Again, it's things like that we would actually look at when we look in detail at the restoration. If we look at the hammers now, you can see the indentation on the hammers. These are original Bluthner hammers, and they're very, very soft. That's very common. So you can see my nail digging into there. That doesn't happen on a new hammer at all. So a bit too soft, and the tone, a Bluthner soft tone, is sort of what people expect, but it's often because the hammers are very worn and very soft, and you can see too much of the hammers hitting the string there. That's probably about a centimetre of it hitting the string, and that means the sound's very unclear, uncrisp, and you can't get enough variety of tone. Well, that does sound nice because the Bluthner grand is a nice sounding piano anyway. They've been refaced at some stage, so definitely candidate for changing them. I noticed one or two of the hinges here are slightly loose, which is not very common, the hinges here, so that needs looking at. Normally they wear so well on the Bluthner grand that you don't need to change any of this, you just change the hammers. Let's have a look at the catches, the checks. They're a bit on the worn side, so they could easily be replaced at the same time. They'd last for a long time more, but when you're restoring a whole piano, there's things like that seem an obvious job to do. And I can't see any evidence of moth. If this looks very white, sometimes it means that the moth larvae have been at it, but that looks fine to me. So that's, I think, everything on the inside to look at, and we'll just have a quick listen to the piano. I forgot to mention on the case, this veneer's pulling off here. That's obviously drying out. That's something obviously that gets done before, stuck back on before it's repolished. And if there's any other areas that need attention too, that's done before repolishing. So here's a written summary of everything I've mentioned. Don't think I've left anything out, except, as always, we look at the down weight. But if the hammers are going to be changed anyway, they'll obviously be the right kind of weight, between 47 and 52 grams here. That's 38 grams, so it's very low. That's because the hammers are worn, and consequently they're very, very and the whole action is not got any friction to it, so you've got very, very low down weight, which is not good if you want to study the piano. You want much higher down weight than that. You can hear the octaves are out of tune straight away on this piano. It's a excellent piano, 1893 Bluthner grand piano, style 7, which means it hasn't got the alicot scaling. Style 8 has alicot, but the octaves here are out because the tuning pins are loose. So it's a definite candidate for restringing and redoing the rest plank. So a full restoration basically. But the underlying tone is typical Bluthner. It doesn't have the clarity here because the hammers are too much hammer hitting the string, and they're too soft. You've got a beautiful soft sound, but you can't get enough contrast. Now it's very fluid to play, but it's too light, so not enough control again. Of course, you get used to your own piano and you get used to controlling it, but this is not, if you played a lot of pianos, you'd find this was one of the lightest you ever come across. And there's out of tune notes here too because the tuning pins are loose. If you've got a piano that you'd like to have restored, do please write to us, info@robertspianos.com. If you've got any comments to make on this piano, then that would be excellent and useful. Maybe it'll be helpful for restoring this piano. So thank you very much for listening. It's tending to sustain because the pedal is not, when you release the pedal, the dampers aren't coming down quick enough. So the pedal's getting stuck somewhere. Thank you very much for listening.